Eastern Standard Time. It's LinkedIn Live, Hour of Empower. So happy you could make it. So honored and privileged to have Carol Kim with us today from California. Today's word, which was selected by Carol, is perceptive. And it's a good time now to get your arms and your mind around what is perceptive to you. Love to hear your definition and how you use it. With that said, I'll turn it over to Carol. She can share a little bit about herself, a little introduction, and her first glimpse of what perceptive means to her. Carol?
Well, good morning, Donald. Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday. We are here. I'm joining all of you from Los Angeles, where we are right in the pathway of a tropical storm coming its way through with Hurricane Hillary. So hopefully for the next hour, the power and the Wi-Fi will stay intact so we can have this Empower Hour this morning. I'm delighted to be here and really appreciate Donald to you in enabling me to join your community and to really talk about this word perceptive, right? For me, I think being perceptive is about having a keen sense of observation, insight, and understanding. And what I've learned is that when you're perceptive, generally speaking, you're very good at understanding things, or at least trying to figure things out. Oftentimes, things that don't always have easy solutions. And what I've observed in leaders who have that skill of perceptiveness is that oftentimes they can envision possibilities, right? And understand nuances and context and the ability to see the bigger picture despite what the current situation at hand might be.
Well, just hearing you initially with your definition or thoughts on perceptive, and with our previous earlier conversation prior to going live, uh, it has so much to do with awareness, being perceptive, which is really feeling, sensing, and there's some intuition to it too, right? That just something in your stomach or something says, hey, this is really cool, or I maybe be a little careful. So it's such a great blend of different elements of your energy, which is thought, trust,
Mm-hmm.
questioning, curiosity. It all gets rolled into being perceptive because you bring your toolbox with you and you decide, hey, how do I qualify? Because I think the test to perceptive is, well, did you qualify it? I felt it was this way. Well, what it turned out to be,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's your reality check. Before we go too far, though, Kinga's here. Kinga's just one of the best. Uh,
She,
Kinga's been on the show on Fridays, and can't wait to have her back. Here's a new gentleman, I believe. Uh, Greetings. I'm viewing from Nigeria. You must know Ambimbola then, because everybody there knows Ambimbola. Dr. Joanne's here. Stay safe. Good day, Carol and Donald. And Dr. Joanne's coming on with Dr. Marilyn in about a week or so for a return visit. So thank you for being here. And how has perceptive served you so well in your career, Carol?
yeah, great question. And it's not something that I've necessarily thought about in myself. It's been more of an awareness that even I myself have become more attuned, right? And I would say that, throughout my public affairs career across corporate, government, and social impact sectors, the roles that I have taken on have often required strategy and operational excellence, policy and political navigation, and having a business mindset, right? All layered on top of it all. And being perceptive has often enabled me to go into a room and assess the situation very quickly, right? You can read, as they say, read a room and formulate a vision to execution strategy, right? And I think over the years, my career that started in public policy, that started in public service, and has had its twists and turns in working at a Fortune 100 company as an executive, is that in working with powerful policymakers, CEOs, and decision makers over the years, I've learned how to effectively manage personalities, personas, and competing agendas, right? And oftentimes, the perceptiveness and what comes with that is really being present, listening, staying curious, so that you're really trying to get an understanding, right, of people's priorities, their pain points. And I think when you start to sort of gather that kind of information, or some might argue data points, right? It has also enabled me to get to a result, right? By having people feel like they've been seen, they've been heard, and more importantly, have skin in the game with the end product or design. And so I think the skill and the talent and the ability to be perceptive has really helped me to understand people, their priorities, and pain points. And so with that, I'm able to build trust, right? Trust in the working relationship, trust in the relationship for the long haul, where it's not simply transactional. And I think that is especially important when you're in a field of public affairs and you are dealing with many, many people who have different agendas, right? And different competing priorities. And how do you build the strategic partnerships and alliances to get to a certain outcome?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Actually, Christine says that too. Personalities, personas, and competing agendas. Love that. Nailed it. And Christine's climbing the corporate ladder and balancing so many things at the same time. Thank you, Christine. Always good to see you. Dennis says, who's our poet, the role you've taken on puts you on an effective role. Kinga comes back with, Carol is fantastic at perceiving the value in others. And it that old saying, it takes one to know one, and that has a lot to do with being perceptive, because when you align and identify with someone else's actions,
Mhm.
it's easier to perceive a lot of what their intention is, a lot of what their trust factor could be. Because to your point, if it's relationship and long term, everything is incremental towards it. If
Mhm.
it's transactional, then it's absolute and final, right? You
Right.
buy something for $1, everybody makes an exchange, it's a done deal. So the key is who's willing to invest with goodwill,
Mhm.
willing to put the olive branch out sooner and bigger, and actually act the bigger person and not major in the minors. Allow the stuff that doesn't matter not to matter. And if it
Mhm.
matters to someone else, allow them to benefit from it. Because in some ways, some people will never break the exchange philosophy.
That's right.
I can't give something until I get something, or know I'm going to get it back. And then the focus is on getting and losing or getting back, as opposed to what is this all invested in?
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? Is it worth the time, the trouble, the money, whatever it is? And I think that lends itself to, a perceivable outcome, a positive perceivable outcome, which is even better than just kind of feeling or knowing. Uh, Dennis says, agree, trust is a must. So when you get back to the workplace, you're right. It's not one size fits all. One message resonates the best. And I think that's where personalization comes into play. Is, some things are better worked with a group, some are better worked individually. It depends on confidentiality. It also depends on ease of communication in a group, what can be discussed and what won't be discussed. And part of that perception is just measuring. right?
Mhm.
What's the temperature in the room here? What's,
Yeah,
what's the energy of these players? Actually, what's the topic?
that's right. Well, it's really interesting because um, I do think that there's a level of an intuition, right? When one is perceptive, but I also believe perceptiveness is a muscle that can be developed, right?
Hmm.
And and for example, one way that to do that, to build the muscle of perceptiveness, is actually honing in the skill of anticipation, right? And what do I mean by that? So, for example, in my career, when I have led my team in preparing a presentation to our company's board, right? I would always spend time with my team to think through and be prepared for, five different potential scenarios, right? And five potential outcomes before we ever head into the actual board meeting. And we would spend quite a number of time preparing for, if this was a scenario, what would the issues or questions be? If this were the scenario, what would it be? And I would always say to my team, it's about being prepared and anticipating what each board member or what topics might come up. And we could be prepared perfectly for all five different scenarios. But I would always say to my team, but don't be surprised when a board member throws at us a sixth scenario that we did not see coming, right? Um, but that's where being perceptive about people right before you go into a room really can enable you to better prepare right for yourself, for the team, to anticipate issues and concerns, and to show up well and be as well equipped and positioned so no matter what gets thrown at you, right, there's a path forward, right? And it's really about mitigating a lot of those unexpected surprises.
Well, I think everybody should be taking notes. I mean, there's so many gems here, really, because I've been in significant situations, meetings, and part of perception is when was the last time you read the person,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And and if you know a person well enough to stay kind of in touch, a lot of surprises don't happen because there's opportunities they could have been talked about,
that's right.
right? So the key is how do you narrow your perceptiveness to saying that, hey, I know what this person's looking for,
That's right.
you
That's
know,
right.
right? And I know
Yeah,
what this person's, where do we get consensus here? And you
that's
see,
right.
when it's prepackaged, it makes it easier on everybody. I used to have sales reps or sales managers, and I would write the PO so they wouldn't have to, you know, because then it would be outlined the way it needed to be and the way I wanted to be instead of interpreted it and then having to adjust it. So it's really getting consensus at the beginning and really asking for a quick resolution, happy resolution.
That's
Can
right.
can we just spend the next 5 minutes taking care of business and then we can catch up on stuff? I mean, you've got to always be the person who's packaging and presenting, and that when you can, the perception too is the initial reaction on people's faces, like
Mm-hmm.
their expressions, which will give them away faster than their words because thought will show up there. And then where you kind of need to go. You're giving a signal, receiving a signal, and then in turn saying, okay, in the moment, what do I have to do to make an adjustment here? So, what's your thought? It looks like you've been in some high level uh, meetings that took some awareness and the ability to be somewhat positively political or at least generous to the members in the group.
Yeah, so I I laugh because as I referenced earlier, I've had some practice at this, right? And some of that practice has really come in the form of having been a policy advisor to elected officials, right? Both formally as well as informally. And oftentimes what it has required is really taking some complex issues, right? Whether it's, the complex issue of healthcare or mental health or public health, right? Which are all issues from a subject matter expertise I've actually dealt with in my career. And it's really taking those complex issues and distilling it into an understandable, right, relatable format. And I think it's always about, for me, how do you approach these complex issues that oftentimes do not have easy answers? And you're trying to build a coalition, right, towards an end result or a specific policy priority or business objective. And it's really about, how you have to have those conversations and do it in a way where the real work, and I would say this all the time to my team, right? The real work and the real decision making does not necessarily occur inside the formal meeting room. The real work is all the pre-work,
Mm-hmm.
the leg work you've done in advance before you go into that room. And it plays into, my years of working in the political arena. And it is about anyone in politics, you have to know how to count the votes, right? You got to know like where people are going to come down on an issue. And a lot of that work and conversations and understanding of each other's priorities and pain points and trying to find a path forward, right? It requires the work behind the scenes before you get into that room. And sometimes, Donald, there are going to be moments where you have given it your darn best and it's just not going to turn into the outcome that you were hoping for, right? But as I always say, for anyone who's in highly regulated industries, whether it's healthcare or fintech or climate or name whichever industry you are that touches on government or that touches on policy or touches on regulations, you have to be in this for the long game, right? And this goes back to why it can't simply about being transactional. It really has to be, how do you move the needle? And sometimes you move the needle 10 inches out, and sometimes it gets dialed back by 5, but you got to like get back up and you got to keep plugging away.
Well, I so relate to what you're saying because when we're really moving to negotiation using perceptive as something that's really important as part of it. But I found on the face surface, everything is easy. When it's one or two, then it's pick one, right? You can't have both. But what I found when you got to know people and they got to know you, the question isn't what was best for each party. That's pretty obvious. The big question becomes what's most important to each party, right? And if I said, hey, this is part of something that's huge for me, and I really got to make this happen, okay, can we work something out, which is not even knowing what we're going to work out, but I'm going to take care of you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Again, if everybody's dealing with the same authority, and someone says, don't worry about it, take care of me on this one, and I'll work it out for you. And in the past, it always worked out because that was the trust. Give me something today that you really don't get a benefit out of and may even take a little bit of a hit on. But the goodwill you're going to build up for me, I'm going to make sure you get taken care of. And that's how you build successes without having to legitimately have to justify everything every day, because, documents are meant for structure, but they're not meant to make something inflexible. Documents only get referred to when there's a challenge, right? Until then, everybody can adjust. And I think that's really perception also, is what kind of person is this? Are they someone who is willing to trust, take something today and hopefully get something tomorrow? And you learn that. And you know what happens? Most people at higher levels are like, hey, just tell me what you need, tell me why you need it, and I don't care if it's within boundaries. Or a lot of times it's like it's within an agreement. Hey, okay, you want a little bit more on this side. Let's bring a little bit more on that side.
Mm-hmm.
And now we both got something that both of us wouldn't have given without it, but both of us need. And I think that's really the key, is how do you get the mutual good, where it's win-win by working together versus win-lose by competing with each other, because those things aren't fun. When you go into meetings with people who are just, that's it, yes or no, we're out of here, right? They're no fun. There's not a lot of preparation. All you can do is hope for comfort, a nice lunch, a nice distraction, something to move the mindset. And I think that's really the key, is mindset to perception. What did they think coming in? Why did they think that? Who gave them that idea? Good or bad. So let's get back to these wonderful people. I let it slide, but Ashif is here from Canada. Ashif's just one of the best. Happy Sunday, all. Welcome, Carol. Hold on tight there. You are the sky. Everything else is just the weather. Pima Ashif is just amazing. He's got a huge, wonderful, successful background. Dean's here from New Orleans. What happened, Dean? You used to be in Texas. Maybe you're on vacation, hopefully. It's always great to see you, Dean. Good morning, Dean and Ashif. Kinga knows everybody here. Perceive what could happen. Awareness, being thoughtful is a skill. So right. Christine says, my new strategy is to be prepared for anything. I've been blindsided enough times that I finally learned. So right. Dr. Joanne says, yes, Carol, this is great. There are always surprises no matter how much you planned. Love this. Yes, show up, be equipped and ready to handle whatever comes your way. That's the spirit, Dr. Joanne. Kinga says, I have no poker face, and so Carol got to know me quickly. And sometimes authenticity is the best way, and it's easier for everybody. When you're authentic, people perceive you like that easier and faster. Renadab is signing in from India. Great to see you. Comes here every day. Another new individual. Haven't seen you, but welcome. Renadab says, an individual should be able to perceive things and make a sound judgment from it. Comes back with people who are perceptive are often good at picking up on the subtle cues, changes or emotions that others might overlook. And this is a big factor in the overall outcome of life for everyone. And really, a poker player's success is all about perception. They say a good poker player plays the cards, a great poker player plays the players, and people do have tells, and there's ways of, well, sometimes you can't help it. Emotion just takes over, and it is what it is. Grateful to be here today and learn perception is your reality. Anthony comes back with, there is an art and science, being perceptive enough to read the room and building a coalition of support to move a strategy or decision forward. That's a beautiful definition, Anthony. You should be very proud of yourself. Hope you and your family stay safe during the hurricane, Carol.
Thank you.
From Paul. I believe my ability to read people is one of my most valuable skills. It always helps. And I'm a strong believer of RMM's relationship management systems, customer, supplier, team, individuals. It's quite an inclusive and readiness practice. And getting caught up, Karen's here. Set boundaries, stick to your values. So, Carol, that's a lot of comments. What's your thoughts now?
Yeah, I feel like this is a whole gang of people with a lot of perceptiveness. So So I will say, you made an earlier comment, or someone made an earlier comment about, having a poker face, and I do understand, sort of that desire, or feeling that need of one must have a poker face. And I will tell you a true story. When I ran the government relations team at my last company, a colleague of mine who is not in government relations. He was an executive leading a different functional arena for the business. And I remember one time, over lunch, like he said something to the effect of like, "Oh yeah, like you do government relations. You're always working with politicians, so it's all about schmoozing, right?" And it kind of made me take I was taken a little bit aback by that statement, right? Because I think there are many people out there who think that government relations is solely about, rubbing elbows with policymakers and elected officials and like feting them with like fancy dinners. And I will assure you, it is far from any of that. Um, it really is about, how you have to understand the policy and the politics and the climate of a situation to inform what your strategy is in helping to achieve the business objective that you're trying to achieve. Again, if you are in a highly regulated industry like healthcare or finance or education or climate, pick your choosing, right? It does require having to build coalition and work with elected officials, policymakers, and regulators in a very effective way. And again, going back to the long game, right? Otherwise, your company will not survive. And you have to change and understand what is going on in the moment, right? Because it's a different legislative body composition, right? It's a different kind of priority. It's a different, you're in good budgetary times and you're in a not so good budgetary times, right? And you got to understand how to work with that. I will also say that one of the things I found so interesting in my time when I made the first major career transition going from the public sector to private was sort of this notion that somehow in a corporate setting, there's no politics involved, right? And I've come to this place of, and maybe perhaps, having been in the world of politics and public policy, I would actually argue, at least in politics, we are honest about our politics.
Mhm.
We're honest about being political. And I would much prefer that than I think oftentimes what you find in corporate settings where, generally speaking, people like to believe that there's no politicking or politics that go on, but it does all the time. Why? Because we're human beings, right? We're human beings, and every company and organization is made up of people, right? And they're made up of people with their own personalities, with their own personas, with their priorities and their pain points, right? And so, I think we have to get honest about the fact that it's not about like politics, like with the big P, but it's really about the politics of understanding people, right? And how do you meet them where they are? And how do you also work in a way that it's not just one-sided and it's an all or nothing framework, because then it doesn't bring out the best in everyone.
Yeah, that makes so much sense in so many ways. And when I think about it, it doesn't have to be a finite situation you're working with, right? It doesn't have to be $100 and how do we split it?
That's right.
It's how creative and imaginative can we make policy, not just continue or add a little bit to it. So what's changed technology wise that now can change the equation that wasn't there before? Where's the money now that wasn't there before? Where's the success of prior situations that we are building on now? So a lot of it has to do with how well did you do last time when you make your next presentation, right? If you're raising capital and you're hitting it out of the park and everybody's like, where can I put more money in, right? You don't have to sell them. At that point, you have to qualify them because you want to be in a position where you have more demand than supply, and you don't have to make an accommodation to the quality or the benefit to make it more commercial and make it easier to market. So, it's all a comprehensive strategy and it's a vision because people don't really care where it is. They want to know where it's going. And can you paint that picture of the future and have them in it and show them how this benefits them going forward, not just transactionally, like you make out here. But hey, if you look at 5 years from now, look at what you're going to get. And, everybody's looking for either elevation in their situation, growing, getting bigger, getting better, getting faster, elevating, and they need to have something to ride on. Right? If you can be the one who gives them that lightning in a bottle that they can take wherever they go, right? They're going to get the benefit too. But before we go too deep, let's get back to Kinga. Kinga says reading the room is incredibly important. Being able to know what to do with that information is even more important. And it is fun if you don't stress on it. If you let the messages come to you, if you let the people naturally project who they are and not manipulate it, because that's an issue. You could create the reaction that you're getting, but it's not the one that's really genuine. It's just responding to what you're doing. I bet you're a great poker player. I definitely am, and had some great times. Love you, Pops. Must be my grandson. And I'll tell you a little bit about him. Paul, empathy definitely goes along, combined with perception. In my experience, you can see more if you're willing to feel. So true. Donica, I'm curious, how do you navigate the fine line between perception and assumption? Or are they one and the same? That's interesting. Well, here's my grandson, Leo. He's actually watched 14 of these shows completely in a row, and he's just 10 years old, and he just loves the ideas and the knowledge, and to get personal development early and to hear these important, really quality conversations from people who you would never have the opportunity to get to talk to, meet with in a short period of time, that amplifies the message through all of us. It's just incredible. So Leo, proud of you. That's his little dog. Paul says, I never got caught up in the office politics. Many people live for drama. It's why these reality shows, and getting back to politics, I owned my own businesses. At one time, I had 72 people under one roof. And with 72 people, there's a birthday every week. There's a funeral every month. I mean, life just has a way of showing up.
That's right.
Right? And if you're not aware of it and thoughtful of it, there's a saying, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Right? And if you can put the care first, and I think another part of this program is myself and Carol are showing who we are by how we're responding to the audience. How you serve is the best way of being known, right? Because there's value being communicated or shared even before there's even an expectation of how it's going to be returned. But it's really, who's the investor here? Who is the person with the further vision? And actually, in some meetings, you'll just say, hey, I'm sorry you couldn't see it. I'm disappointed I wasn't able to show it to you. But don't think for a minute it ain't there, And what I always learned about no is it always just meant not yet, not ready, And do I really want it? Because it's kind of funny, and there's that all sour grapes thought. Well, if they don't want me, I don't want them. But in a lot of cases, after you find out what they did, why they didn't want you, you decide, I never wanted them either if I would have known that. Right? And that makes you adjust. Unless you're dependent, unless you're needy, you need to be able to walk away. The best attitude to have is indifference. Right? If it's great, I'm in. If it's not, I don't care. right? And if you can be in that position versus I got to get this, I have to have it, whatever it takes, we need this. That changes everything, especially if you have a team, right? Because they already know what the end up is before anybody else. So, with that thought, what's your thoughts, Carol? There's so much to perception.
Yeah, there is. And I think, and so one of the participants, I saw the comment about, knowing, getting very clear on your values, right? And that is absolutely important, right? Because being perceptive, right, it's a skill, it's a gift, but it also has to be backed by, at the end of the day, like who you are, right? Your core values, and is the work and the decision making aligning to your values, right? Because if you're not clear on that, then you're not being guided by the North Star, and no amount of perceptiveness is going to help with that. Yeah.
Well, I think to be perceptive, you need to be pretty open. You need to be available. You need to be accessible. So it's not you just reaching out to people and taking their pulse, but it's you being open to them calling you up
Mhm.
before a meeting, and actually, you want to, cross your T's and dot your I's. If you're going in with something that's kind of an understanding, how firm is that?
Mhm.
Especially if you're not alone, if you're bringing somebody who's important or special. The last thing you want to do is embarrass anybody, right? And someone comes in and says, "Oh, I was expecting this, and this is what happened. What happened?" And I think that's important, is because everybody's got to look out for each other's safety. Not their future or their success, but it's like, why would I put you in that situation? You
Mhm.
know, and what are we going to do about it now? And that's really the key for coming together around the table, or there wouldn't be a reason for a meeting of the minds if there wasn't an interest in learning before one decided, right? If the decision's already come down, the meeting's just a formality at that point.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, you hit on some things here that I think many leaders, right? And, whether it's in the public sphere, whether it's in the private sector sphere, I think for a lot of leaders, it is always about how do they achieve their vision, right? And what again in the roles that I've always taken on as a trusted strategic advisor to policymakers and CEOs is that being perceptive has really allowed me to hone in on my strength in helping to take a vision, and oftentimes a vision of a leader, and turning it into reality, right? And turning that into reality through, the development of an effective strategy, the securing of cross-functional alignment, right? Which means you're working with a lot of different people around that. It's about how you build the right alliances, and that's ultimately going to help you execute skillfully, right? And again, it goes back to being perceptive, right? Like, what is this person wanting? What is this person trying to say? Why is that person going in this direction, right? What are the pressure points? What are the priorities? What's sort of the the parameters, right, that they're trying to achieve an outcome that seems so boxed in for them, right? And once you start to um, make these inquiries, staying curious, asking the questions, listening intently, right? Sometimes it just really helps to show up and be viewed as a thought partner, because oftentimes that's what they need.
Mm-hmm.
They need thought partnership, right? And that doesn't just happen without having the conversation. And once you start developing that, lots of great ideas come about. I mean, no doubt there are people who have joined us here today, right, who are probably sought out as thought partners for others, right? In the work that they do. Like, my friend, my good friend Kinga, who's on here, who I know you've also had come up to your show and speak. She's an amazing thought partner, right? I mean, and thought partnership, not just in the big things, but even in like the daily minutia things, right? So, yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the keys to LinkedIn is being able to be an influencer and influence people in positive ways. The other thing is how good can you get at being good at what you do? And a lot of times is showing preparation, being an advocate for the other side, making sure their situations and considerations are taken into consideration, right? Like, I know this is important to you, and that's why we carved this out for you. And I know how you are so into that cause or whatever, and we're going to allocate that. You want to put it all out there to say, hey, I've done some thinking about your side too.
That's right.
Right. And I haven't just been grinding or sharpening my blade. I've actually been figuring out ways that these meetings are something we look forward to creating value that wouldn't have been there without these meetings and these discussions. And how can we continue to build on that cooperative spirit? And I think that's really so key is sharing what you feel, why you feel it, what your hope is, and then what happens if it doesn't happen, because there always has to be an alternative. It's not like, well, if you don't give it today, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Well, we're going to have to discontinue that. We're going to have to close that down. All these things start having impact. And the key to all that is timing.
Yeah.
Right? If someone says, well, how long do we got? If you say a week, well, we can't leave the room. If we got 5 years, okay, let's meet in 3 months and review something. And I think that's the key is everything is balanced. Everything is, does this fit now? It used to fit, doesn't fit anymore. What do we have here? And I think by soliciting input, that's so important because then you get ownership, right? Everybody had a chance to say something. Everybody had a chance to add something, right? And now it's responsibility and accountability that takes over. But let's get back to a sheet. Critical thinking takes honesty, compassion, courage, and a little bit more. So well said. Paul's complimenting my grandson, Leo. Thank you. That gets points for everybody. That's awesome, Leo. Kinga's right up there with them. Others easily perceive desperation. That's a great point, Don. Knowing your worth is critical. There's always going to be another day. It's just which day is it going to be? The one you just had yesterday continued, or is it time for a new day? And if you're good, you'll be good. And if you haven't, you should be grateful for all the benefits you've been able to derive. Oh, thanks, Carol. We have become great sounding boards for one another. And I think that's the beauty of community is if I can't do it, could we do it?
That's right.
And some things take partnerships. It's not like a choice. It's like, you've got this, we've got this. And especially if you get into laws, because then there's jurisdiction and then there's, you name it. And you want to get it right. And again, it's who you're dealing with. And some people you perceive they're dishonest. Nothing can be trusted. Right. And that's where you get boatloads of lawyers show up.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's like, I don't trust them for anything. Make sure it's written, make sure it's documented, make sure it's signed, and it's so awful because it's almost like you're insuring against something that's about to happen somewhere, versus leaving somebody. And, I think having a personality, but also being personal in a quality way, like knowing what's going on with the people's families, how their last trip went. People want it, there's a saying, be interested, not interesting. Showing interest in people, especially people who most people don't share much interest in. It has a longer effect. That's why some of the greatest leaders stop their car, talk to somebody on the street. Naturally it comes to them. and it shows in their public perception versus somebody could be the nicest, kindest person, but they're perceived as someone who's, abrupt or not very social or not very friendly. So a person has to make an effort actually to share that I'm a good person.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts, Carol?
Yeah, like as you were saying that, I think what came to mind was also um, there's a tendency to view those who are in powerful decision making positions, right? Like um, that is how you view them. That's the lens through which most people view them or interact with them. But I think what you said about taking the time to really also try to understand them on a personal level, right, really helps to even helps you um, humanize, right, these leaders where they're or those who are in powerful decision making roles, right, that they're not just like making a decision and poof, that's it, and that's what they do, and that is who they are, right? No, like there's a very, generally speaking, there is very much a human personal side to them, right? And when you have an opportunity to try to get to know the person on that level, I think it gives you a wider perspective, right? A wider perspective about them. It gives you an understanding of yourself, more importantly, right? And how that comes into the relationship and the rapport that you're building with a person. So it's not just some, some powerful person who's just hammering down a decision, right?
Well, again, I think it also applies to the different parties' position. Because I've known people to make awful financial decisions for good personal reasons, you
Mm-hmm.
know, that nothing would say this is a good financial decision, but it's a cause or something. And, I've been fortunate to be with people who had the wherewithal, and I'd ask them, why'd you do that? It does, it's because I can now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If I get a third instead of half, or if I don't get anything. And some people even go to the point where they want to be anonymous and they're given 100% not even being recognized, let alone get a return on it. So everybody's situation is not everybody else's situation. And
That's
that's a
right.
point people make is like, if you're desperate to get, it doesn't mean that someone's desperate to give, or they really take your desperation as a positive from you. Because most people don't always get what they want or need. They usually get what they deserve, right? And if you can justify, here's why I think I need an adjustment, right? And if I can tell my story, and if it means something, maybe it's there. No different if when you're in school and you went to a teacher and said, I don't really think this is a C paper. I think it deserves better, and a quality teacher would say, well, let me
Unless
hear.
they're hoping, please give me a C, which then you'll take it.
Well, you'll learn more by the discussion of the grade than what the grade was about, right? Because if
Yeah.
you can say, I worked so hard, it meant so much, and it's like the real question comes down to why.
Mm-hmm.
I hear what you're saying, but why would I want to do something like that? Give me a reason, because that's another thing. The people you're negotiating with usually have to share it with someone, right?
Yeah,
They
that's
need to get
right.
board approval. I mean, you might have got the authority and responsibility and did your job, but it's still, hey, the board's gotta sign it, gotta review it, or the bank's gotta bless it, or whatever it is. And I think I need more to go in with, right? They're going to ask me these questions, and if you can help me here, I might be able to help them, and then we're done. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's where you understand negotiations just continue. There is no outcome. It's a continuum if it's a longer term relationship. And it's like, hey, you got help me get the decision. Now you got to call the board guy up.
Yeah.
He's the one who's sitting on the fence, and he wants to hear from you, because everybody wants someone to be put on record, especially if it's a 50-50 or kind of a wiggly decision. is like, before we buy the land, we need this information and we need this person certified. Whatever the case is, you want to have the best case you can, not just enough.
Yeah.
And you rather have more to show than less. Carol?
Yeah, no, it's just in listening to you, it reminds me of you know, the fact that I was once told by someone who has worked with me, um, and a seasoned executive, and was told that that I have a tendency where when I hit a wall, I was told when you're someone where when you hit a wall, you look for a window and you find the window. And I think that again goes back to being perceptive, right? Because I can hit a brick wall, and believe me, I have hit walls so many times, been knocked out. Um, but when you hit a wall, it's not enough just to say I hit a wall. Okay, let me just dust myself off and just walk away. It's really then, how do you take the opportunity where you hit a brick wall and find the window, find the door, dig underneath the window, the wall, right, to get to the other side. How, is there a way for you to scale the wall, right? This is where perceptiveness comes in, right? Because it's seeing the situation at hand, and yet still looking for ways of seeing the possibilities, right? And how do you get to those possibilities? And for me, oftentimes it involves reaching out and working with people. And I think what you said earlier too, Dawn, is the fact that a no right now doesn't mean it's a no forever, right? And that's very, very true. I think every one of us, whether we recognize it or not, we're having to make decisions, and we're having to do it with trade-offs, right? Because short of, we live in a world of bottomless mimosas on Sundays, nothing is bottomless, right? Resources are not bottomless. You have to figure out how to live within your means. And a lot of times it's finding ways to get creative with the means that you have been given. And how do you leverage that, right? And I think a lot of times being perceptive is really about, how do you come into a room, you recognize the situation, you have an understanding, right? And yet, how are you able to leverage it to help move the needle forward? Again, it may not be moving the needle 10 inches forward. It might be half, right? It might be a half inch, but a half inch is better than you staying static, and I think especially in my time of working in government, working on policy issues, um, you know, you, the moments that always leaves me with an impression that's unforgettable are the times when policies or legislation gets passed finally, right? And in the moment, it feels like it was an overnight success, right? But many times the reality is a lot of policy issues have been debated, mulled, introduced, reintroduced, amended, gutted. It's gone through its cycle for decades. And then somehow it's like, I always say, I don't know, the stars aligned, God's finally heard, something happened. There is a window of opportunity, right? You've been hitting the brick wall for years and years and years. And then finally, like, you see a window, and all those years of preparation, right? The real work that I referenced earlier in this conversation, the real work that has been done, when that window opens, You just gotta fly through that hole, man. Because when that window opens, that is not the time that you start planning and trying to prepare, because then it will close.
Well, and I think that that's so valid, and it kind of reminds me of the saying is luck is when preparation and opportunity meet,
That's right.
right? And without preparation, opportunity won't matter because you're not ready for it. And a lot of times you got to fail to succeed. I remember when I went for my first business loan, I got turned down 4 times. But by the 5th time, I realized what made them turn me down the first 4 times, right? Because the only thing I would ask is like, I'm not going to change your mind, or, hey, I appreciate you taking the time, but can you at least tell me what was it that didn't work for you? And they would say, well, if you would have beefed up the balance sheet or something, whatever. By the 4th time, I was ready because I had covered every question. And in essence, when you think something is ready to get voted on, sometimes it's still in the preparatory manner. And I think it's really about taking responsibility and accountability, because that's saying if it's going to be, it's up to me. And usually, where I really learned a lot of that is when I did turnarounds and restructurings. And when you start dealing with creditor committees, right? And everybody's got money, and there's different parties, preferred and unsecured, and all kinds of different ownerships. You need to really always come down to best case versus what will happen. Because a lot of people are thinking their case, right? I've got $100 invested, and you're saying I'm only going to get 30 if I go along with the plan, but I'm going to get 10 if I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And once you can get people off of where they were to now, here's reality, right? And I used to always start every one of these meetings like this is an open kimono meeting. I said there's nothing left to the imagination. I'm putting it all on the table. Everybody can see it for what it is. And I think honesty, and here's the other key thing, is getting out front of something when you know it's going to come out anyways, right? Being the first to say, this is what happened, and I got to keep you up to date, because that blows everything. Because I remember with credit managers, if you said the check was in the mail, it had to be in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
Because they say, I'm only going to stand up for you once. And if you tell me the money's coming and I tell them the money's coming, and if it doesn't show up, we've got nothing.
Yeah.
And you appreciate that. And I think to the side conversation, you could say, Jim or Sally, listen, I got to give you credit. At that meeting, you really went out of your way for me. And I know you didn't have to, and I just want you to know how meaningful that is, and that brings people at a personal level. And, usually what they'll say, you deserve it. You are worth it.
Mm-hmm.
I had meetings where they said, leave the room, and I didn't know what room I was coming back to. Right? They would say, we got to talk. It's okay if you give us 5 or 10 minutes. And the sitting in the hall was the longest time, because your mind is, do they like me? Do they trust me?
What are they saying?
And the nice thing was, every time it would always be, we're going to go along with you because you're a good guy, you're a straight shooter, you do what you say you're going to do, and that's rare, and that's the class you want to be in. Is you can't always be responsible for the situation, but you can be responsible for how you communicate it, how you include people in it. If you look at PR, it's all about getting the right message out at the right time to the right people.
That's
and
right.
continue to support them. Anthony comes up with inorganic influence. Read this dark to understand our versus organic influence, compelling storytelling aligned to the mission. Everybody wants to hear your story. They say stories sell, facts tell. You can bore people to death with numbers, what I mean? But if you can visualize something and have it be visualized by them, then you're making some progress. Sheaf says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, for sure. And the other thing is, everybody hears your music before they hear your words. If you come into a meeting excited, happy, enthusiastic, it's going to brighten, it's going to build some of that around you. Sometimes you got to get warm up a little bit before you dive right into it. Ashif says opportunities versus obstacles, Carol. Karen Young, new name. Resourcefulness is a skill. Everything is a good skill if it moves the needle, like Carol said, even if it's just a little bit. It's a skill that made that happen for you, and maybe it's a skill you remember to maybe actualize more often. Dr. Joanne says, when an opportunity presents itself, take it. Kinga comes back with Carol Kim, how we perceive what we can do to add value within our means to add to the situation, our ability to assess that and how to move the needle forward is what matters. And Kinga is an expert in team building and in process. And that's the benefit of these conversations. You're not just talking about one person who knows something and everybody's trying to learn it. These are well accomplished people who are great at knowledge sharing, and that's the team you want. People are always thinking, always looking for that facet or that little insight that no one's starting to see. But also that tagline always goes a long way, is how can we make this ring for a longer time? How do we make this resonate in their heads? How do they, when they think of this, they think of that? There's a lot of thinking going into Perceptive. And it's fun when you finally get it right. I knew I figured that person for a fisherman, or I knew I figured that person for somebody who loves to go to a baseball game. And that's where you get a little bit of upfront. What are they into?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And people come to your corporate office, and all of a sudden you got the little white letter sign welcoming them that day. Because it's the little things that make a difference, that show you really put a little time and attention. You researched them and know that, hey, they love these kind of restaurants when they're in town. You can make everything else perfect except for what you're there for, because that's why you're having a discussion. Petra's here. Petra's a great lady. Be a true facts influencer, has to make a difference for someone. Petra says, hello, everyone. Sorry I'm late. Too late, Petra. So, it's just amazing, Carol, how an hour can fly by.
Yes.
So quickly. Like I say, once the audience takes you, it's like riding a wave, and you never really think of what to say next. And especially with both of us kind of exchanging different insights and ideas, especially based on experience, where you can relate. And even if you close your eyes, see yourself in that room again with those people, having that conversation. And to your point, the fun is in the preparation, the planning, because that's a match. When you finally get it into production, whatever it is, and you exhibit it, I think there's also something that shows you're ready, you're prepared, a confidence level. And one last thing I'd like to throw in is courage. Sometimes you got to be very courageous when you're perceptive.
Mm-hmm.
And once you identify it and you're sure of it, you need to respond to it. And it could be in a much better way. I didn't understand. I didn't realize. I mean, if I would have known, okay, now that changes everything.
Yeah.
Now, either way, it could change.
Yeah.
I didn't know we had another year, or we had another $1 million we didn't discover. Now we got some room. And that works for you and against you, because it gives you comfort, but it also lessens sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Everything changes, like you say, when someone says in one day the window closes. It's not coming back open. It's just not going to happen. Right?
Or it might take another 10 years for that opportunity to come. So, it is about the planning, the preparation, and it requires, working with people, right? And it requires working with people effectively. And that's where, the gift and the skill of perception and being perceptive, can go a long way.
Well, and I think too is again, everybody assumes everybody's working with the same best intentions. I've been in negotiation where people admit it's the worst thing they can do, but it's a principle with them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when you exchange being practical and pragmatic with a principle that you can't negotiate, I've had companies say in 100 years we've never ever done something like that. Why would we start? And I said, well, if it's 100 years, maybe it's time for a review. I mean, 100 years ago, there was a different world. How can you keep doing the same thing? But, here's the other thing, too. If you can't get your answer, at least make sure they got your question, right?
Yeah.
That, hey, I'm still going to have this issue. I'm going to come back when I'm ready, I think I've got what I need, you know? And a lot of times, I mean, depending on the situation, I'm really a nice guy, but I would always say, who writes the checks around here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do I talk to that person, right? Because again, who's got the authority, who's responsible here, and that's another thing you got to ask yourself before you even get into it. Who are you, and what can you do, right? If you don't have the authority or the power, what am I going halfway to go the full way? And I think people also respect your intelligence and your time, you know, and people have a tendency to push you a little bit to see how far they can go, to, throw something out that's like from the moon, but, you're going to deal with it. What's your final thoughts, Carol?
Yeah, my final thought is that perceptive leaders can positively impact company culture, right? Because culture is built by people. And perceptive leaders can also positively impact innovation and the bottom line, right? The bottom line, if you're, obviously in business, and I wouldn't necessarily say bottom line, but when you're in the public sector policy sphere, perceptive leaders can also work successfully towards achieving, policy outcomes. So I would say, industries where they value perceptive leadership, right, is going to employ people with insight, empathy, creativity, and a vision that's going to drive value for everyone.
So perfect. Because, when you really look at it, it's the intangibles that make all the difference. The things you can't see, but you do feel the integrity, the honesty, the concern, the compassion, all those things. And you should be able to project that when you think it's necessary, right?
Mhm.
And it's not being false, it's being responsive and reactive to the moment and the person and the situation. And you're right, all plans, Mike Tyson said, all plans go away when you get hit in the mouth.
That's right. That's right.
Now you got to work with what you're given.
That's
So,
right.
and I think that's so true, but it's also fun when you look back and you do look at it like a dance in a way. You look at it like, okay, a chess game, but a fun way of doing better together. And when you can be the positive person, and you're right, there's some people walk in a room, the whole room changes.
Mhm.
And they didn't do a thing. All of a sudden, everything gets brighter. Everybody's getting a little bit more happier, or more importantly, expecting, right? It's the image, the impression, the anticipation that creates the initial moment, and then when that person speaks, there's also people who want to just be around that person, will find ways to do it, whether it's invest with them, participate in some charity event. So there is accessibility that is a premium based on certain negotiations and group meetings. And people want, like elevator buttons, want the people can take them up and not take them down, make them feel better for being in the room with them. And hopefully maybe building on something mutually beneficial going forward. Why not get on a winning streak and keep building on it and recognizing people? And I think that's one of the final elements, is making sure everybody's recognized.
Yeah.
I remember everywhere I go, I spend so much time with the receptionist, or the person at the counter, just to understand their world a little bit, but more importantly, to know that someone cares about their world.
Yeah, that's right.
And is willing to take the time. And then their supervisor, well, that's pretty cool. Not too many people stop and talk to Stella for a while, or ask how that candy's being made down on the production line or whatever. It's again those little touches that take you from a brand to a signature brand.
Mm-hmm.
The people can just tell, hey, this is a high quality opportunity here. These are pretty cool people, that they kind of know their stuff. And I think that builds confidence. So anyways, with that said, we can talk forever, and we usually do. But come back in 23 hours. I want to thanks Carol so much for her time today. It was her first time doing a LinkedIn Live here, and she just hit it out of the park. And I want to compliment the audience for being so supportive and so involved with so many detailed comments, to really come along for the ride with us today and actually drive the ride today. So with that, last words, Carol. Can't thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Donald. Thank you, everyone, for joining and engaging in this conversation. It's always the best when we can bring our perspectives, our insights, our own experiences, because I think that's the best way you layer on top of each other's points and conversations and make it really fruitful. So thank you. And I'm glad that Hurricane Hillary, tropical storm, whatever the situation is right now, did not cut out the power and the Wi-Fi for me. So thank you so much.
Well, I know we were both crossing our fingers, and I'm sure I'd love to have Carol back and continue our conversation. So with that, have a lovely day, and come back tomorrow. We've got Leslie Flowers. Everybody knows Leslie. She's just outstanding. And have a beautiful, safe day, and keep being as perceptive as you can.
I will.